when you have a threat group like COLDRIVER who is actively developing and updating their malware, it means they're paying attention. They're watching, they're listening, and this is not so much a threat group that was active a couple years ago and they have a few straggler implants here and there. This is a group that is monitoring the news, watching to see what's going on, watching for disclosures, watching for their software to be caught, and then is actively rewriting.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Defenders Podcast Weekly Intel Chat. My name's Christopher Luft. I'm one of the co-founders of LimaCharlie, and I will be your host. Joining me today to break down the cybersecurity news being shared by the awesome InfoSec community is the one and only Matt Bromley. And don't forget, this podcast is brought to you by LimaCharlie, maker of the SecOps Cloud platform, infrastructure for security operations. Think of it as a backend for your MSSP, where everything is built API first. Scale with ease and confidence as your business grows. You can start today for free at limacharlie.io. Now let's get into it. How you doing today, Matt Bromley?
Hey, Chris, what's going on, sir? I'm doing very well. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Got a good sleep last night and feeling ready for it.
That's good. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I spent the past number of hours dealing with an outage. We'll talk about that outage a little bit later, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I had spent some time dealing with an outage, but we'll get there later. We'll talk about that later.
Okay, before we jump into it, though, I got to know, where in the world is Matt Bromley today?
Where in the world is Matt Bromley is currently coming to you live from a conference room in Amsterdam.
Ooh, Amsterdam. Lovely city that I've never been to, so...
Awesome, beautiful place.
Yeah.
If anyone who's listening is from the Netherlands, please reach out and let us know. I don't know if you'll hear this before I leave at the end of the week, but would love to meet up with anyone who is local and had an awesome time while I've been here too. And I'll be here for a few more days. So I doubt anyone will catch this one live, but if you see me around, or if you see me over there through the window recording this episode, know that you were somehow in it.
All right, let's get into it. Some interesting stuff today. A breach at the Kansas City National Security Campus, or KCNSC, a facility responsible for manufacturing roughly 80% of the non-nuclear components for U.S. nuclear weapons, was enabled by two critical Microsoft SharePoint vulnerabilities, which we may have covered on this show just a few weeks ago. CVE-2025-53770, which is a spoofing vulnerability, and CVE-2025-49704, a remote code execution. The vulnerabilities affected on-premise SharePoint servers and were exploited shortly after Microsoft released patches on July 19th. Despite those patches, exploitation began immediately, with the Department of Energy, or DOE, acknowledging the impact by July 22nd. Though the DOE claimed minimal damage due to its reliance on Microsoft M365 and other cybersecurity protections, federal responders, including NSA personnel, were deployed to KCNSC by early August. The breach targeted IT systems, but the intrusion raises concerns about the possible lateral movement towards operational, or OT, technology environments that manage actual manufacturing systems. Attribution remains contested. Microsoft linked the broader SharePoint exploitation campaign to Chinese state-sponsored groups, Linen Typhoon, Violet Typhoon, and Storm 2603, all of whom were reportedly preparing to deploy Warlock ransomware. However, a source directly involved in the KCNSC incident claims that the threat actor in this specific case was Russian. Cybersecurity firm Resecurity did not confirm this attribution, but acknowledged the plausibility, noting that Russian cybercriminals could have reproduced the exploit after its technical details surfaced publicly. Additionally, Vietnamese researchers had demonstrated chained attacks involving SharePoint flaws in May's at Pwn2Own Berlin, which may have accelerated the reverse engineering timeline. Resecurity noted initial exploitation activity originating from infrastructure in East Asia, which is consistent with Chinese APT obfuscation tactics, and cited misuse of Microsoft's Active Protections Program, or MAP, by Chinese groups as a likely vector. So yeah, this kind of stuff is terrifying, getting into the IT systems of something that's involved in the nuclear weapons supply chain, and the gap between IT and OT is ever thinner as we get more and more embedded in all this stuff.
Absolutely. Chris, what's even more terrifying than that is knowing that on July 23rd of 2025, you and I talked about these vulnerabilities and mentioned to folks, and this is not an I told you so moment, but I told you. No, I'm just kidding. This is not an I told you so moment, but one thing that I did mention to you back at that time was we're likely going to see more long tail effects of these types of vulnerabilities. And I think I may have mentioned at the time, I didn't watch the episode yet, but I think I might have mentioned, like, we won't necessarily know which, how this impacts us or where we see this impacted or breaches associated with this. But here we go. We've kind of come full circle now. Believe it or not, it actually is, an incident that took place and happened back in the July timeframe, if I'm not mistaken. And that ties very, very closely with when we saw the vulnerabilities released, or I should say the vulnerabilities disclosed, the patches released, and the exploits being developed and released out there. And what this does, folks, if I can just go back and visit that timeframe really quick, the fixes for the vulnerabilities were announced on July 19th. The organization, the NNSA was hit by SharePoint attacks on July 22nd. Chris, you and I talked about this on July 23rd. Then a very, very short window, a very short period of time, the adversaries were able to flip a switch and go after some sensitive organizations. And as you mentioned, we're here talking about a organization that is associated with non-nuclear mechanical, electronic, and engineered material components used in the U.S. nuclear defense systems. I like how they dropped the non-nuclear side of it, which tells me they're likely a supplier, someone adding, some content or adding some, kind of manufacturing capabilities to those particular, units or those plants or those factories, if you will. Interestingly enough, it does stem back a little bit into the vulnerability that we had talked about earlier. And it also does go back to the theory that was proposed where various Chinese organizations had access to Microsoft's active protections program and were able to use that to reverse engineer a vulnerability or an exploit that they then subsequently, took advantage of. I think you mentioned, though, at the very end, which is one of the most important considerations here, which is the IT-OT convergence. And as the article calls out, the zero trust gap, and wondering, knowing, positing, curious, did the adversaries get access to the OT side of things? And folks, that just goes to show how this convergence and kind of this linking of technologies here can end up causing a pretty significant impact. This was a SharePoint vulnerability that may have eventually led to an OT compromise. We're not necessarily saying that it did, and Chris and I don't like to spread FUD that much, but I do just want to drive home the point of, look, adversaries, they weaponize stuff quickly, and flat network or very, very little segmented networks can let an adversary get pretty far pretty quickly if they need to. So, I'm not going to sit here and just, advertise patching and whatnot all day long, as much as I would love to, but it does drive home the criticality of being up to date on software updates, introducing segmented networks, introducing correct authentication mechanisms. I find it an interesting call out in here and a hat tip to the folks at Microsoft that the Department of Energy contended the department was minimally impacted due to its widespread use of the M365 cloud and capable cybersecurity systems. Feather in your cap, Microsoft, for the Department of Energy saying up front, we weren't compromised because of Microsoft implementation. At least that's how I read it. But point being, not having the right security stack in place, not having visibility, not knowing what's going on, all of this can lead to some significant gaps that adversaries are all too happy to take advantage of very quickly if you give them the chance to do so.
Yeah. So even if the breach remained limited to IT systems, the incident highlights the fragility of security boundaries within facilities like KCNSC, where design, manufacturing, and supply chain functions are interdependent. Experts stress that while OT systems are likely air-gapped or isolated, the assumption that such separation is sufficient is increasingly outdated. Lateral movement from IT to OT is plausible, if not architecturally prevented. As Jen Savata of Clarity points out, attackers gaining access to even partially connected systems could manipulate programmable logic controllers, precision manufacturing robots, SCADA systems, or distributed controls tied to production quality and reliability, all without needing to compromise classified systems directly. The breach underscores a critical gap in how zero trust principles are applied across federal infrastructure, while IT systems are progressively adopting identity-based control segmentation and monitoring. Operational technology lags in adopting comparable standards. The Department of Defense is currently developing an OT fan chart to map zero trust controls for manufacturing and process control environments. This unification of IT and OT security postures is considered essential for preventing cyber intrusions from escalating into physical or strategic threats. Additionally, even access to unclassified but technical data can be damaging. Specifications, tolerances, and non-public engineering documentation, while not secret, can still provide adversaries with insight into U.S. weapon design process or supply chain weaknesses. The KCNSC breach, regardless of attribution, serves as another indicator that traditional IT-centric defense models are insufficient in isolation while critical physical infrastructure is at stake. And I do like how it covers it at the end. I alluded to it earlier, but just in the people that I've been talking to who are working in security and OT environments, you can just sense by the way the technology is evolving that that gap that used to be very clear between IT and OT is thinning, as more and more security and technical teams are remote, and things become more sophisticated. It's hard not to reach across that line and be able to do stuff remotely, but that introduces a very dangerous attack vector.
It does. Yeah. You're 100% right on the money there, Chris. It is fading. It feels like that line might be fading a little bit. I don't think either of us have that kind of daily purview into those networks, but we realize that adversaries recognize that there might not be as much separation as originally thought. And, that gives a golden opportunity for them. So we definitely want to be vigilant, especially in these types of environments where, we've got these things up and we've got these potential weaknesses in place. We always want to make sure we've got these additional protections in place. And as I mentioned, hat tip towards the, to the folks at Microsoft who got a really nice shout out from the Department of Energy.
Yeah. And another thing about OT environments, I'll just add too, is because they are so expensive to change and update, there's probably way more systems than anybody would like to acknowledge out there that are still running off of an old XP machine in the corner, a very vulnerable system. And yeah, it might be air gap from the internet, but as things evolve, how long before that thing is accessible somewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that just drives home the knowledge that adversaries have about how these networks work as well. This is another area where I'd say, from a cybersecurity perspective, we're probably talking about lesser known capabilities, lesser known networks, lesser known systems, or older legacy systems, older legacy things that just don't have the right support in place. They might not have the same security software, the same types of visibility. And, it's critical to get, I think, the security footprint in place there, Chris, because they are sensitive networks. We don't really need to spend too much education in that. I think over the past few years, everyone's gotten a good idea of just how sensitive OT is, but that's all in theory. I'd like to see some, stronger implementations in place where necessary. Of course, in this case, there was a win, if you will. We didn't have a large, massive scale breach take place. But Chris, it just makes me think about the number of networks who have, equally sensitive information or equally sensitive systems in them that don't have the same type of protections that this one did.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's enough to scare people into action.
Fingers crossed, but we don't like to be scare tactics, but sometimes they work.
Sometimes they work, yeah. All right, next up, COLDRIVER, a Russian state-sponsored group also tracked as UNC4057, Callisto, or Star Blizzard, has shifted rapidly towards a new malware development following the public exposure of its previous malware, Lost Keys, in May of 2025. Within 5 days of that disclosure, COLDRIVER operationalized an entirely new tool set built around a collection of malware families with a common delivery chain. Google Threat Intelligence Group, or GTIG, attributes this retooling directly to COLDRIVER and notes that the newly developed malware has been used with greater aggressiveness than in any prior campaign from the group. Since the publication of Lost Keys, GTIG has not observed it in the wild at all, suggesting COLDRIVER has fully pivoted to the new tooling. The initial stage in the new malware chain is a DLL named No Robot, delivered via a Lure webpage mimicking a CAPTCHA using a variant of the older cold copy framework. This click fix Lure now convinces the user to execute the DLL using Rundle32, diverging from the previous multi-stage PowerShell approach. No Robot's earliest implementation installed a full Python environment and downloaded multiple components, most notably a Python backdoor known as YesRobot, which decrypted using keys split across registry entries and downloaded files. This complexity appeared designed to hinder reverse engineering, but the approach proved operationally burdensome and easily detectable due to the bundled Python runtime. And so if I'm reading that correctly, these guys got discovered and completely retooled their whole attack system within 5 days. Like, that is some impressive turnaround.
Is it though, Chris? I mean, with vibe coding today, is it though?
Yeah.
I'm just saying. Sorry, we don't like to give adversaries compliments on this show, so I will just be the first to say, is it though? Couldn't they have just hey, ChatGPT, give me a different version of this thing in Python?
Or I suspect maybe it was already in development or something like that, and it just
it could be that too. This one is a pretty interesting one. First off, Wesley Shields, you are both the author of the May release on Cold River, as well as this updated one here on that has been released recently. So a hat tip, awesome blog post. I love reading through this. Lots of technical details inside of here as to how this works. I will agree with one of the statements that was made about the number of indicators and the number of things that are associated with what this malware is doing. It's, Chris, one thing I will say, they may have retooled their backdoor or their malware, but good Lord, did they leave a lot of noise in these systems. And this just goes to show, folks, it's October 2025, and we're taking a look at these, yes robot, no robot, maybe robot pieces of malware. It's a PowerShell backdoor that is maybe robot, a Python backdoor tracked as yes robot, and a malicious DLL called no robot, all of which tie into the overall kind of CAPTCHA theme that Cold River has been known to use here. But these are pretty noisy pieces of malware, to be honest with you. No robot is utilizing Python 3.8 installation. It's storing part of a crypto key in the registry, scheduled task creation, bits admin. If we take a look at Yes Robot is again a Python backdoor, which, hat tip and pro tip to everyone. When you install and use Python on a Windows system, it creates a significant amount of noise. That was already there from No Robot before, but by all means leaves a lot of things to look at. And then they mentioned the Maybe Robot, which is a heavily obfuscated PowerShell script that downloads from a specific URL, executes a command using CMD, and then a specified PowerShell block. Chris, there's logging built in for all of these. There's all sorts of evidence that gets left behind. So if I put on my detection hat and think, how could folks possibly defend against this? There's a lot of noise that gets left here, a lot of noise that gets dropped behind by these, which kind of makes you realize one of two things. Either the adversary simply didn't care about how much noise they created and just sort of like, whatever, or it didn't matter. Right? It didn't matter how much noise was created, and they intentionally created a noisy piece of malware, not to get caught, but because they didn't need to be quiet. I was watching something really interesting the other day. It was a little bit of a social experiment. They had a fence. It was kind of like a barbed wire fence, Chris, and they told a group of people, hey, this fence is electrified. If you need to, you're either going to need to go under it or over it. Right. And it was a group of about 20 people. It wasn't until about the 13th guy that he went up and just touched it and realized it wasn't lit at all. So he just lifted it up and just let everyone else kind of walk through it. And sometimes they don't care how much noise is in there. They know that people aren't looking. They know that people aren't checking. And very similar to this electric fence analogy, we all think of malware as super stealthy, but sometimes adversaries just leave a bunch of noise around. And did they get caught? No, great. We didn't need to write stealthy code. The one thing I will say that makes it super complex when you're splitting encryption keys across different places in a system, or you're trying to split malware functionality across multiple areas inside of the Windows operating system, it can definitely create for some instability, as the article calls out. But just a lot of detection opportunities in here. One thing I will mention about what this particular group is doing and how they're doing what they're doing, and maybe what that causes us to look out for. Not only do we take the multiple iterations into account, but we also need to take the areas that have been targeted by this, Chris. One thing that I will take away from this article, when you have a threat group like Cold River who is actively developing and updating their malware, it means they're paying attention. They're watching, they're listening, and this is not so much a threat group that was active a couple years ago and they have a few straggler implants here and there. This is a group that is monitoring the news, watching to see what's going on, watching for disclosures, watching for their software to be caught, and then is actively rewriting, is actively retooling to get themselves in a better position. Noisier or not, they're trying and they are paying attention. So that should be another call out for defenders out there. The threat actor is watching. They are paying attention, so, be vigilant. They're out there and they're paying attention. They're seeing what's going on and they're likely going after new targets.
Yep. So following limited use of Yes Robot, ColdRiver transitioned to a PowerShell-based backdoor dubbed Maybe Robot, which GTIG assesses as its current preferred tool. Unlike Yes Robot, Maybe Robot doesn't require Python and is more flexible. It supports executing remote commands, downloading payloads, and running arbitrary PowerShell blocks via a custom protocol. The infection chain was also simplified temporarily to streamline delivery, but later iterations of No Robot reintroduced complexity such as key splitting and multi-stage downloaders, which is likely an attempt to regain operational security and increase analyst workload. Despite continuous development of No Robot variants, GTIG has not observed any changes in the Maybe Robot payload itself, implying ColdRiver sees it as a stable endpoint while focusing efforts on evading detection at earlier stages. The shift towards malware deployment, rather than relying solely on phishing, as ColdRiver has historically done, suggests a more targeted approach for high-value intelligence collection. GTIG speculates this may involve re-engaging targets previously compromised through phishing, leveraging malware to gain deeper access into their systems. The infection chain's evolution also shows ColdRiver's increased operational tempo, infrastructure rotation, and use of obfuscation tactics such as varying DLL names, exports, and download paths. These adaptations collectively make campaign tracking more difficult and underscore the group's commitment to evading detection and maintaining access. GTIG has incorporated indicators of compromise from this activity into Google Safe browsing protections, issued alerts to potential Gmail and workspace targets, and released technical rules for detection, including Yara rules for broader industry use. Domains linked to cold copy and C2 infrastructure, file hashes for the various No Robot and Maybe Robot stages, and observed file names used in the infection attempts are all available via GTIG's platform. This level of transparency is intended to support collective defense efforts, particularly as ColdRiver's campaign continue to evolve and target politically sensitive individuals, NGOs, and policy stakeholders. So I like how earlier you were talking about making a lot of noise maybe because they don't have to. And it made me think about one of those design triangles where you can get it fast, cheap, or quality. And I feel like there's got to be an equivalent for malware developers. And these guys are definitely pinging speed as one of their preferred methods.
I would agree with you mostly. But one of the things that I find to be a really interesting choice, Chris, is utilizing a Python set of scripts to launch or to put into place a PowerShell-based backdoor. When you install Python, especially because the malware shows up with a Python 3.8 installer, Chris, when you go through the process of installing library support, code support libraries into a Windows operating system, it's a significant amount of noise. And not only that, it is a huge, it's a sore thumb. It sticks out like a sore thumb from a SOC perspective. It is telemetry that you don't expect to see. And especially on some of the systems that they're in, it's like this person doesn't even need Python. They might not even know what Python is.
I was just going to say, a detection like that on Wendy from accounting's machine. Why
Exactly.
is Wendy installing Python, right? That
Exactly. And it's just, to me, it's kind of like, I think there's a little bit of a fine line between creating noise because they don't care and then unnecessarily creating noise because that's what they've got. And I feel like it's a little bit of the latter where, hey, this script in Python works really well. How do we run it? And it's like, well, you need to install Python. It's like, fine, ship a dropper that does that. And it's kind of like, what a choice. Right? What a choice to say, let's install Python to run these two scripts to ultimately drop PowerShell. I would make an argument that if you could get PowerShell working, why not just architect the rest in PowerShell? Yeah. But at adversary choices, we may never understand volume 32.
Yeah. If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
That's right.
Okay, Matt, this one I put in here for you. CISA has officially added 3 newly exploited vulnerabilities into its known exploited vulnerabilities or KEV catalog, urging swift remediation efforts across federal environments. The most prominent of the trio is CVE-2025-33073, an improper access control flaw in the Windows SMB client with a CVSS score of 8.8. Microsoft patched this vulnerability in June of 2025 and noted that the public proof of concept exploit code was already available at the time of disclosure. The vulnerability allows authenticated attackers to elevate privileges to system by coercing a victim machine into authenticating back to the attacker's SMB server using a malicious script. This makes it suitable for lateral movement in post-compromise scenarios. In parallel, two high-impact authentication bypass issues in Kentico Experience CMS CVE-2025-2746 and CVE-2025-2747, both rated at 9.6 CVSS, were also added to the KEV list. These flaws affect the staging sync server's password validation process and can allow an attacker to control administrative objects. While these bugs are serious on their own, Watchtower previously demonstrated in March how they could be chained with an authenticated RCE vulnerability to enable full compromise of Kentico deployments. Kentico addressed the issue in versions 13.0.173 and 13.0.178, and organizations using older versions are now under pressure to upgrade immediately. So I don't know what we say here other than patch. I don't even know what Kentico Experience CMS is, but sounds like maybe federally used customer relationship software.
It's the first time I'm hearing of Kentico's Experience CMS. Experience spelled with an X, by the way, not an EX at the very beginning there. Let's instead focus on the KEV list for a quick discussion here. For those of you that may be joining us and hearing about the KEV list for the very first time, CISA's known exploited vulnerability list is a list of exploits that are known to be exploited by adversaries in the wild as of their release or publication. The big difference, the kicker here is it is obviously not the entirety of the CVE list as we know it. It is only those with active exploitation in the wild. Read in between the lines, this thing is being exploited. This thing has been weaponized. There are organizations out there who are using it to their advantage to gain entry into an organization. If you are in an organization that runs one of these pieces of software and you have the vulnerable version, it is no longer a matter of if, but when, because again, adversaries are out there doing it. So I've always used this, and we've talked about this on the show many times, Chris. The KEV list is the final barometer for should I patch that thing just yet? And the answer is yes, you should, because this is your final tripwire. It is being actively exploited. Now, Chris, I don't want to put you on the spot with this, but as I was loading up our articles to review and talking about these, I inadvertently actually selected a much more recent article from the same folks over at Security Week who indicated that the Oracle EBS vulnerability that we discussed in 1 or 2 weeks ago is also being added to the KEV list. Now, dun, dun, I know we don't have the same. What's that?
I said dun dun dun
dun dun dun. Right? Imagine that was happening. Right? Now, interestingly enough, this is the second time in one episode that we have correctly predicted a vulnerability gets announced and then we discuss it a little bit later on. So in summary, and Chris, I'll make sure you get both links to add them to the show notes for folks, a lot of very big, high value critical adds to the CISA KEV list. SMB focus, as Chris mentioned, at Kentico's Experience. There's some mention of an Apple vulnerability in here as well. That gets dropped in that has also been added to it. This was a security hole in July 2022 that for some reason is oddly enough still being or has been added to the list. CISA warned that the CVE 2022-48503 was being abused in the wild. And I'm looking at the different versions in this and I'm thinking to myself, who's still running these versions? But believe it or not, that just goes to show like even mobile devices can fall victim to this. Even Apple devices, which are usually inherently pretty secure, and that's not Matt's opinion on it. That is, we don't talk about iPhone vulnerabilities as much as any other software on here, but that just goes to show, even older vulnerabilities can be weaponized and utilized by adversaries, number one. Number two, if you ever needed a reason to patch or upgrade, here it is. The KEV list is the final tripwire. But just a quick note for folks, within the past 24 hours leading up to Chris and I recording this episode, we've had quite a few additions to it. A few of them being vulnerabilities we've talked about before. Others being kind of newer but higher level vulnerabilities that could lead. But across the swath there, Chris, we've got vulnerabilities from Windows, vulnerabilities in Windows, in Apple iOS, Kentico experience, and then the Oracle EBS or e-business suite. Pretty busy day for the KEV list today, and we're here to report on all of it.
I almost wonder if we should add a section at the beginning of each show where we just quickly list them off instead of explaining the whole thing again, and people can keep up.
What's new on the KEV this week? To be honest, I mean, it's not a bad idea if we have an update every week. Maybe we do. I don't know. Anyone listening? Any thoughts? Should we have like a KEV bookmark?
Yeah. It might not be every week, but it'll monthly. I'm sure there'll be new stuff.
Oh, I'm sure. So, yeah, there we go. It's a good idea.
Yeah. So CISA's action is grounded in Binding Operational Directive, or BOD 22-01, which mandates that federal agencies have 21 days from the KEV listing to detect and remediate the listed vulnerabilities. This directive ensures prioritization of vulnerabilities that are known to be actively exploited in the wild and represents one of the most direct levers CISA has to improve cyber hygiene across U.S. federal systems. Agencies that rely on Kentico or public-facing CMS deployments or other software that's been exposed should be treating this as a high-risk window for potential escalation or compromise. So yeah, I think we touched all that to death. Patch, folks. I should have worn my shirt today.
We both should have.
Yeah. All right. Last one I got for us, which I'm sure anybody working in IT or cybersecurity is well aware of. Just yesterday, Amazon Web Services, or AWS, experienced a major outage on October 20th that impacted thousands of applications globally, disrupting operations for companies and end users alike. The root cause was traced back to a failure in the health monitoring subsystem for AWS network load balancers within the EC2 internal network. This failure affected the domain name system, or DNS, resolution for AWS's DynamoDB API, which many services rely on for data storage and identity resolution. Though AWS services returned to normal late afternoon Pacific time, Amazon acknowledged that some services such as AWS Config, Redshift, and Connect would continue processing message backlogs for several hours. This was the largest global internet disruption since 2024 CrowdStrike outage, and marks at least the third major incident tied to AWS's US-East-1 region in Virginia, which I think is the oldest AWS region.
It is.
It's the default region for many AWS services. Amazon did not respond to questions about the repeated reliability issues tied to this data center. The outage affected users worldwide and disrupted everything from business operations to personal tasks like paying at salons or rescheduling flights. Notably, services like Venmo, Zoom, Snapchat, and Reddit were among the platforms affected. Experts emphasize that although AWS offers mechanisms for resilience, many developers neglect redundancy measures, particularly in favor of speed and cost savings. That's a big deal when Amazon goes down, and I don't think a lot of people even have the resources to build redundancy into the systems they have. So it's like you're relying on these people to deliver the goods, and when they don't, stuff doesn't work.
It's tough though, Chris. The group I'm working with this week, we actually have been talking about this since yesterday. We've actually got quite a few components in the class that I'm in that rely on AWS, and believe it or not, we weren't able to do those things. And unfortunately, it started out with, hey, there's an error on this site, not sure why it's not working, not sure what's going on here. And then finally, someone checked Down Detector, which gets mentioned actually at the very beginning of this Reuters article, and it was like, US East 1 is down, and that might be what the problem is. But, Chris, it's a little bit of a tough thing. Like this is obviously a crisis that took place. Services were down, companies were down. I think there's like measurable revenue impact for a lot of organizations and stuff like that, But interestingly enough, it wasn't any sort of an attack. It was, it's always DNS. It was DNS. It was a misconfiguration, if I remember correctly, if I remember reading through it. I think you mentioned exactly what had happened. But something, a misconfiguration or something originating from within the EC2 internal network, underlying the subsystem that monitors the health of network load balancers, that ultimately led to a DNS issue that ultimately just toppled all over the place. Now, the tough part about it, Chris, is when people do subscribe to services and utilize providers like AWS, one of the things that's inherent to what you do is an SLA, an uptime period that guarantees your thing will be up, all the time. Statistically, a single day of outage for US East 1 is still just a rounding error from a statistical probability. So at the end of the day, Amazon actually continues to keep their uptime percentage. Now, the problem is, in the moment, everyone feels it. Everyone feels it because multiple services and sites don't work and things that people use, convenience products, convenience apps. And I was reading another article related to this that talked about the AWS outage exposed just how much we lean and rely on technology these days. And whether it's, I can't listen to Spotify, I can't chat with my friends, I can't game, I can't pay for stuff. It just goes to show that we lean on these services so much, it's almost to the point where they become kind of critical global infrastructure, for lack of a better term. And what do we do to make these more distributed? How do we ensure that, I say, and I don't know if it's ever possible, that downtime just never happens? And 100% uptime is a really tough thing to think about, but it gets felt very quick when something happens, and that's one of those situations where it's tough for folks to really get a handle on what's happening. Applications likely probably start to look for additional resiliencies to be built in. But interestingly enough, one of the lines I pulled from this Reuters article here, Wall Street was largely unfazed, sending Amazon shares 1.6% higher, as a result of that. And it just kind of goes to show you that you can have an infrastructure provider or a cloud provider that a lot of people build stuff on top of, and the SLA will never be 100% for this exact reason. A thing happened. We took it down. We're so sorry, but we'll be back online tomorrow. Don't worry about it. Yeah. And sure enough, everyone is.
Yeah, and for me, this really highlights, next time you guys are planning your tabletop exercises and thinking about business continuity, try and figure out what you're going to do when something like this does happen. Do you have a landing page you can throw up to let customers know what's happening? Are you sending out emails or alerts? Communication and all that stuff should be part of your resiliency plan, because it's never going to be perfect. So at least plan for stuff like this.
Deploying US West, any one of these things might be might be a better strategy to take.
Yeah. The good thing is they usually never more than 24 hours. I mean, 24 hours is usually a long one. Usually these things are measured in single digit hours, but you never know, right? So
there's another part of it too, Chris. I read through AWS's kind of ongoing technical blog about it as it happened. And one of the issues, this kind of death spiral of support that they ran into, was I believe AWS's support capabilities in that region were down as well. So the thing that you use to provide support or request support is based in the region that's down. How do you request support? And as it gets worse, you don't have an ability to update. And that's another area where maybe some resiliency in regions is necessary, or maybe some diversity in regions from a business development perspective might be the way to go, because other regions were up and running, but unfortunately there's so much of the world tied to US East 1, most of it Western apps for sure. But there were some global implications. I believe a few British companies, Lloyd's, for example, was part of this. And then things like, Bank of Scotland, Vodafone, BT were all hit by this as well, which I'm sure someone somewhere is going to have a question about, right? But then you get into other things being impacted: Reddit, Roblox, Snapchat, Duolingo, Robinhood, Coinbase, Uber, Lyft, Clash Royale, Fortnite, all sorts of things. These are global apps, so everyone feels the impact from that.
Yeah. So academics and cybersecurity professionals noted that reliance on centralized cloud platforms without sufficient redundancy make both businesses and consumers vulnerable to cascading failures. Jake Moore from ESET referred to these as fragile infrastructures. I'm going to butcher that. Nishanth Sastry at the University of Surrey pointed out that the root issue lies in overdependence on single providers. Despite the significant operational impact, Amazon's stock closed up 1.6%, as you mentioned earlier, Matt, showing investor confidence remained intact. Nevertheless, the incident reignites longstanding questions around cloud resiliency, fault tolerance, and whether providers and customers are taking sufficient steps to mitigate systemic risk. Yeah, interesting problem to solve. I knew of a company called Zugma Systems in Vancouver, British Columbia, that my uncle actually founded about 15 years ago, and they were trying to create an adapter layer for hybrid cloud environments. So basically, you would build into the adapter layer, and then you could swap out the backend infrastructure. And I wonder if it's time to see something like that emerge again.
It might be. It might be, or I don't know. Maybe everyone should just go back to on-prem. Let's just let the cloud just fizzle away.
Awesome, Matt. I think we're at like 262 episodes now. So,
that's so cool. That's awesome, man. Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure. Next week, I will be somewhere different, believe it or not. Looking forward to sharing the details with you then.
Oh, yeah. And I'm going to CyberX Defend the North in Vancouver, British Columbia tomorrow. So this probably won't be out by then. But yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter announcing it then, does it? Hopefully I saw you there.
Maybe, possibly. We'll see. Okay. Anyways, take care, sir. Great chat with you.
Yeah, that's
it.
And that brings us to the end of another Intel Chat. You can support this show by sharing your favorite episodes with a friend or subscribing and giving us a rating or leaving a comment on your chosen podcast platform. If you want to be part of the conversation and access the intel we talk about in real time, you can join our community forum at community.limacharlie.io. Thanks for listening in, and we'll see you on the next one. The Cybersecurity Defenders podcast is hosted and produced by Christopher Luft. The show is co-produced and edited by Sam Blake with graphics by Amr Al-Khatib. Sponsored by LimaCharlie, scalable infrastructure for your security services. Visit limacharlie.io to get started for free.